On today's show, is Zeev Buium a top 10 pick? What are Konsta Helenius' biggest areas of improvement? And what's the best fit for the Habs in the 2024 NHL draft? All coming up on today's show in this mailbag episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High. And on today's show, we've got a big mailbag episode. We've got a ton of questions. We might not even have time to cover them all, but some very, very interesting questions in there, including a question about Zeev Buium, who has been rising up rankings. And in terms of recent performances, people are starting to wonder if he's a top 10 pick, and I might be on board with that. Let's get to that later on. We'll also talk about Konsta Helenius' biggest areas of improvement, what he needs to work on. Helenius is another player who's risen up my rankings at least, and has put himself squarely in the top 5 conversation. And then we'll talk at the end about some more Habs related questions, some more Montreal Canadiens related questions, especially with their recent performances. You can understand why we're getting these questions. Who's the best fit for them? What kind of player could they be aiming for? How many stars are missing? And a lot more. But before I get into any of that, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next, or if you have any questions for mailbag segments like these, make sure to send them in by YouTube as well. We always read our comments, and we're more than happy to look into that for you. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Alrighty, so let's lose no time in getting into this. I think a very interesting first question here from Danton Danielson on Twitter asks, of the players in Dobber's current top 10, which do you think NHL teams as a whole or on average might disagree with your rankings on the most? I think this is pretty straightforward. There's two names that we can come up with that are pretty kind of up there in terms of, we have different than the consensus, right?
Oh, for sure. I think there's a common theme there too in terms of high-end skill, but a lack of size. One of those players would be Zayne Parekh, who we had ranked at 4th overall, who is 6 feet tall as a right shot defenseman, but is quite slight for that height. So he still needs to build up a lot of muscle to kind of fill out that frame. But the level of dynamism and skill, creativity that he has shown, not just this season, but internationally at the Liiga this summer, last season the OHL, has just consistently been tremendous. And I struggle to remember a more dynamic, like pure offensive defenseman that we've seen the last couple of seasons. This is like a really, really high-end talent, and he's not a perfect player by any means, but he is also fairly solid in his own zone. There's definitely still progression that needs to come there for him to be more than net neutral at the NHL level defensively. But the offensive skill is overwhelming, and he's a player that we like a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other one's Cole Eiserman, right? I mean, he just there's some concern. We have him at 5 right now, and there are players rising up the boards that are catching up to him. Caden Lindstrom, Konsta Helenius, are kind of in that conversation. With me, the issue with Eiserman is I haven't really seen any high-end play driving, any high-end defensive acumen. Even the power forward elements that are there individually in this game aren't cohesive enough for him to work that game, work that power forward role at a high end level. He's really, really, really good at what he does, which is shooting the crap out of the puck and putting it in the back of the net. But it's just outside of that, is there enough of a kind of surrounding base of skills in order to uplift that goal scoring ability and get him, 30, 40, 50 goals at the NHL level? I'm
Yeah,
not there yet, and I think it's
it's the
just,
question that we're asking, right?
exactly, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what keeps him kind of out of that conversation, at least with us at Dobber Prospects. Moving on to the big question here with Zeev Buium from Casey Lee, a longtime listener of the show, starting even before you joined, Sebastian. He's been one of our longest time followers, and I'm really glad that he asked this question because it's a very very interesting one. Thoughts on Zeev Buium? Could he be a top 10 pick? Yeah, absolutely. He has been lights out since the start of the season, but his play in November really improved. He started getting a lot more comfortable on the puck. He's up to 18 points in 14 games as a defenseman playing on a stacked
Freshman.
defensive core. Freshman defense. This is his first year in the NCAA. First and foremost. Second, he's in this draft year. Like, this is ridiculous. But beyond the point totals, he's playing on a stacked decor. He's playing with the likes of, Shai Buium, and, he's playing on a D pair with his brother mainly right now. But he's also, sharing ice time with the likes of Sean Barons, who's been good as well. Boston Buckberger, who's an older undrafted defenseman as well. Like, this is not an easy decor to Pearson, and he's third on the point, third on the fourth on the team in points, first among defensemen. Like, there's a lot to love here, but he's really mobile. He's able to close gaps really effectively. He's one of those kind of smaller offensive minded defensemen, but he doesn't sacrifice the defensive zone at all. Like, his mobility, he uses it perfectly to close gaps, to get back defensively, to pivot and keep up with rushing forwards, especially when they're bigger and stronger than him. We talk about this at length with Lane Hudson. Like, that's his biggest weakness, is he can't pivot and keep up with a guy who's bigger and faster than him, with a longer reach, right? But so far, I haven't seen any real instances of Zeev Buium getting blown past in coverage. Like, he's been, even in situations where the player gets past him, he's still in the race. Like, he's still in the running. It's just, yeah, he's been really, really impressive. And as we watch more games, as the month of December, especially January, rolls around, like, if we keep seeing this kind of stuff, like, yeah, do you see top 10 as a floor? Like, it's been really impressive for him so far.
It's been excellent, and I mean, I know already that our USA scout is in love with him,
Yeah.
David Sod, who did push for Buium inside our top 20 in
Mhm.
our meeting, which was a good call of his. And
Yeah.
I remember being very on board with it. I was always a big fan of the mobility, but
Mhm.
in the last like 3 weeks since our meeting, the the tools have been on full display, and
Yeah.
there's been a consistency to his game that we haven't seen with other defensemen that are in that same kind of tier. Like,
Mhm.
players like Artyom Lovshunov have been plagued with inconsistency this season and have shown really bright high-end flashes. But with Buium, you're getting those flashes along with this consistent ability to just create advantages in all three zones. I mean,
Yeah.
he uses his mobility better than any other defenseman in this draft class in terms of both offensively and defensively. I think Zayne Parekh probably beats him out in terms of offensive movement and using his mobility to create there. But in terms of the defensive zone, I don't think any defenseman in this draft class can fully compare to Zeev Buium's
Yeah.
leveraging of his mobility. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But moving on to a really interesting question we got like really at the last minute from JD Young, the host of Locked On Sharks. Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. What's your biggest flag when scouting a prospect? Go first.
Red flag, right?
Yeah.
I would say it is a combination of rush decision making and linear play. I think when
Yeah.
you have that combination of things, it makes it really difficult to project a player beyond a real depth role in the NHL. When you have one of those two things, I think that you can still work around it. Like linear play, especially for wingers, it can still be relatively effective at the NHL level in a middle six role. I mean, look at guys like Josh Anderson, who's been like rough this season, obviously, but has made a good career for himself in the NHL by being an extremely linear winger. But again, with Anderson, the processing speed is a bit rough, and I think that he kind of demonstrates the ceiling of that mold of player. Doesn't have to be a power forward, obviously, but I think that you need to have versatility in your game,
Yeah.
and when you see players that are restricted both in terms of their style of play, but also how they think the game, the upside is quite limited. So that's always something that I keep an eye out for.
Yeah, for sure. Last year probably would have said scanning habits, but we've had recent examples of how that can be worked in. And right now, what I would say is really the biggest red flag for me with prospects is their hands, their feet, and their brain not being on the same page. Like that's the biggest thing for me, because that's so difficult to get on the same page. A player who has two of the three should be able to figure it out. A player who has like none of the three like on the same page, really bad.
Yeah.
Like there are players who are extremely fast, so their feet are up here, their brain is down here, and their hands are somewhere in the middle. And it's like there's going to be a disconnect at some point, and that's going to limit your upside. So I think that's the biggest red flag for me when scouting a prospect. And a rapid fire one, real quick, before we go to our ad break here. If you're building a team around a top line defenseman, do you want Dickinson or Levshunov?
Dickinson between those two
Absolutely.
options
There,
for
there's
sure. I
no
mean, yeah,
there's no doubt there.
not very
There's just no doubt
close.
there. And that's the thing is like the top line defenseman is a bit rich for both of these guys, but I think especially for Levshunov, I don't think that like that's the 1% chance that he hits like his true high end ceiling, which is
I'd give him more
we'll
than
see.
1% chance. I think there's enough there that he could push for it. He
Yeah.
definitely plays a style of play that I think would give him more opportunities of hitting that ceiling than other players, for
Yeah.
instance.
Mhm.
But yeah, Dickinson for sure. Though I think I'd
Dickinson.
take Parekh over either one in terms of likelihood of top pairing upside.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. But that wraps things up for our first segment, and we'll get into our second segment where we break down some more mailbag questions, including what the upside is with Konsta Helenius. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 that you can spend on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. If you've been thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl this year, or your least favorite quarterback to throw 3 interceptions in the next game, the choice is yours with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about a couple 2024 NHL draft prospects and also talk about some Edmonton Oilers prospects. Let's get into it first and foremost, I think, with the thing that I'm having a lot of trouble kind of wrapping my head around as well. And it's what are the areas of improvement for Konsta Helenius? What could keep him from panning out? This is from Danton Danielson as well on Twitter. Yeah, break it down for me because I like him a lot. I have trouble seeing any particular thing that he needs to work on in terms of his foundation of skills. Maybe we can refine the skill set, but yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't know if there's any individual thing that would keep him from panning out. I think this is a player that at least I personally am very confident is going to be a valuable NHLer,
Yeah,
even if he just hits his floor. Like the level of intelligence, the skill, the the way he's able to layer all of his abilities together into one really cohesive package. He's entirely a player where we talk about the toolkit rather than the
yeah,
individual tools.
mhm,
And that makes me very confident that at the very least, you're getting a really, really good middle six piece here. And that said, if I have to look at any individual tool that I would want to kind of supercharge and like work on and focus on, I'd probably focus on the shot itself. I think that he has the intelligence right now where he's scoring his goals mainly by getting into scoring positions, by using his mobility and handling skill to shift defensive structures and fire off well-timed shots when the goalie's screened.
mhm,
But when the goalie gets a really clear look at his shot, he rarely beats them, frankly. And
yeah,
this is against Liiga goaltenders, right? This is a 17-year-old player. You can't really fault him for that. He's playing extremely good hockey right now. But I think if he's able to get his shot to a level where he can beat goaltenders straight up, he would really diversify his offensive game. And you'd see a player where right now he really is defaulting to playmaking overall. You get him into way more dangerous areas by being a true dual threat and triple threat too. The handling skill is really impressive. So
mhm,
there isn't anything that screams like red flag in this game that I've seen, but
yeah,
I think if the shot is able to get ramped up a level, you'd see his
mhm.
offensive game take off another couple of degrees.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the main thing for me as well. Is just you mentioned it. It's the cohesiveness in this game. It's just everything's on the same page. I mentioned at the start that in the first segment that one of the main red flags with me with prospects is when their hands, their feet, and their brain are all on different pages. With Helenius, everything's on the same page. Like there's no
Oh yeah.
disconnect there. Everything's cohesive and everything's fluid within this game. And it's funny because I think that Helenius uses his skating so well to benefit his shot. It's just that he hasn't learned the art of deceptiveness. He hasn't added as much strength as he could on his shot. He's still raw in terms of his ability to utilize his raw goal scoring ability, but the way he uses torque and torsion in his upper body in order to create that velocity on the shot off the rush, I think is very interesting. And if you can lean into that, make that even more of a key benchmark of his game. Like, Sebastian Aho, without the ability to score 30 to 40 goals a season, probably isn't as effective as a player overall, just because his shooting threat is such a big element of his playmaking, it's such a big element of his play driving, his ability to get to dangerous areas, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think Helenius could really benefit from really working on a shot and making it a benchmark of his game, something that will strike fear in goaltenders' hearts when he's accessing the offensive zone with that really good skating and stick handling ability. But yeah, moving on to another question here that we have about Michael Brandzak Newgard. We're getting this question a lot, and it's why isn't Michael Brandzak Newgard producing right now in the Hockey Allsvenskan? The Norwegian winger is, you know, he's a really skillful player, a really intelligent player, a really effective player, a really mature player, but the points aren't coming. They have for the last couple of games, he's actually been
Mhm.
not bad in terms of production. But yeah, overall, I think the main issue with Brandzak Newgard in this element is the bounces just haven't been coming. And it's been very clear that, everything he does in the offensive zone, in the neutral zone, and in the defensive zone is projectable. It's really good. It's effective. It's mature. It's smart. But he'll zip a pass over a stick to a teammate, and then that teammate will just whiff. Or he'll take a shot, it'll squeeze through the goalie, but it'll lean back on the shot and cover it. Like there are so many little things that could just like go a different direction. And we're seeing it so far in the last like 3, 4 games. He's gotten points at a regular pace. So I
Yeah.
think it's just a matter of time before that kind of becomes consistent. And the other question we have here for this segment, a segment I think that we can kind of a question we can kind of spend a bit more time on is what are your thoughts on Dylan Holloway's ceiling and Xavier Bourgault, two prospects that are in the Edmonton Oilers system? Does does Dylan Holloway have top line upside? This is from James Steffen on Twitter as well. Talk me through that. I haven't watched much of Bourgault since his draft year, but I know you like him.
Eh,
Yeah,
eh, eh, like I don't
you're
know.
used to, right?
But not really. I've never been very
Really?
high on Boko actually. No,
Oh,
I think I ranked him like at like 40 or
oh, I'm
something
I'm
his draft
confusing him
year.
with Maverick Book. That's my bad.
Yeah, Maverick Book, man. As a player, I'm a big fan of. But yeah, like Bogo's been struggling to really produce at the AHL level. He's kind of been
Yeah.
a perennial half point a game player since joining the pro ranks, and I
Mhm.
haven't really seen like huge developments in his style of play and overall, just like the pro level habits are kind of the same now as they were before, which isn't
Yeah.
the best thing. I think he can still hit as like a decent goal scorer on a third line, maybe, but that's about the highest that I think that upside will carry him. Dylan Holloway is more interesting to me. I think that this is a player that has a decent enough shot at being a solid 3C. He's not flashy, but he's very effective. He uses his strength very well. He gets to the net front consistently. He's a pretty good like screen for the goalie. He always adjusts his positioning to get into those shooting lanes, try to tip pucks. And I think that his upside is still decent enough as a third liner, but I really don't see any top line upside with Holloway either.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I'm on the same page regarding that. I don't think that we're necessarily looking at a future top liner in Holloway either. Especially if your top line's the likes of McDavid and Draisaitl. I think the
Yeah.
Oilers are good for the next couple of years, unless something really bad happens or continues to happen. Like it is in this year. Yeah, the goalie situation needs to change in Edmonton. It's
Oh yeah.
not like you can't waste Connor McDavid's best years. Like Bedard's either, ideally.
No.
But yeah, no, McDavid, like McDavid and Draisaitl are such a dynamic duo that I think that you're doing them a disservice by not making sure every year that you've got all of the tools and there are no question marks in your lineup. Because as good as they are, two players don't make a team. Like, they need surrounding skill. And there have been major questions, obviously, with Jesse Puljujärvi and Kyler Yamamoto and all these players, kind of going through the system and not panning out and not being able to gel well on that line. I think Zach Hyman has been so far the best of the additions in terms of wingers for these guys. But even then, I mean, Evander Kane's kind of been iffy, producing, but also kind of a bit of a liability as well. Defensively, big question marks. I think Evan Bouchard is fantastic offensively, but defensively, like, what is going on? Philip Broberg,
he needs to be insulated.
Yeah, like Philip Broberg is not good enough defensively to insulate Evan Bouchard. So it's just like, where are you going from here? Like, Darnell Nurse has kind of fallen off the map in terms of overall production. Like, there's so many questions in this lineup that I feel like the Oilers are kind of basically hoping that someone random comes out of the system, like guns blazing, and takes this offensive or defensive core, by storm. But overall, just get a goal. Samuel Montembeault was just chilling in Montreal, not doing much. They have 3 goalies. Just give him a call, see what it's worth. I feel like every second you spend not making that trade, it just gets more expensive. But yeah, that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third segment where we break down some more Montreal Canadiens related questions, including who's the best fit for the Habs outside of Macklin Celebrini in the 2024 draft, and a lot more. That's all coming up after these messages from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
The new NHL season is here, and it comes with all sorts of possibilities. Your favorite team could hoist the Stanley Cup, Connor Bedard could score 50, and you can get in on the action by joining the Sleeper Fantasy Hockey app. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy contests here at the Locked On NHL Network, because you can win 100 times your cash with daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is correctly predict 8 specific player stats, and you can win 100 times your money on Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
Alrighty, so moving on to our final segment, we'll talk about some more Montreal Canadiens related questions. We have a lot of Habs fans that follow us all over Twitter, so let's get right into it. Outside of Macklin Celebrini, who is the best fit for the Habs? This is from Brady Piercy on Twitter. I'll start first. I think that if we're going with what they usually pick, it's definitely going to be Caden Lindstrom. Lindstrom really fits the need in terms of, a big high upside center who can, ideally within the next 5, 6, 7 years, like, play on your first line and be like a bona fide power forward center. He's got the fine motor skills to kind of overcome his kind of lankiness. He's got a big body. He's not afraid to use it. He's very physical, very, very pesty, which is an energy the Habs need at times, which is really, really fun as well. But I think that if I'm going for a player, let's say in the top 3, let's say the Habs really kind of drop off the map and suck real bad and end up having a top 3 pick, Ivan Demidov needs to be in that conversation. He's the highest upside player outside of Celebrini for me in this draft. The skill set is undeniable, and the Habs need star power. As much as I like Caden Lindstrom, I think the odds of him becoming a star are a tiny bit lower than Demidov's. However, Lindstrom is about as safe a pick as you can get. I don't see many scenarios where he doesn't end up being a top 9 player, right? Like, that's just, he's got such a safe floor as a player and room to grow. So I think that either one of those two I'd be fine with. Also, in terms of a stylistic fit, in terms of what they go for usually in this kind of range, Michael Brandsegg-Nygård would be another one. If he's picked in the top 5, I'm not fine with it. But if he's picked from 6 to 11, which is probably where the Habs end up at the end of the day, I'm okay with it. Like, he's really good. And I see a lot of Habs fans kind of pulling their hair out at the idea of picking Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. I promise you, there's a lot more to his game than the stat sheet shows. Like, he's really, really good.
He is. Like, I think my 2 players that I think make a lot of sense for the Habs would not only offer really high-end skill and high-end intelligence, but also offer a lot more versatility at forward in terms of being both capable centers and wingers. So Caden Lindstrom, I think, is the obvious one there. I think he completely fits the mold, both of what the Habs need and what the Habs typically draft and value.
Yeah.
But the other one that I'll add in there is Konsta Helenius. I think Helenius completely fits the Montreal Canadiens mold as a highly intelligent, skilled player, producing in a good pro league and creating advantages everywhere. And there's a lot of room to grow there with added physicality. I think that you could easily see Konsta Helenius topping out as a first liner. And there's just so much there. I mean, we talked about him in the last segment, and we are very, very big fans of his, and he'd be an excellent pick inside that top 5 range.
Yeah.
And both him and Lindstrom would basically give the Habs 3 players that are very, very comfortable in top 6 center roles on top of Suzuki and Doc. And all 3 of those, whoever between Lindstrom and Helenius on top of Suzuki and Doc can also play the wing. Like, we've seen both Doc and Suzuki play on the wing decently well. And I think kind of having that player that, like at the beginning of the season for Montreal with Sean Monahan starting off on the wing and then dropping down to center as soon as Kirby Doc went out with injury is really, really good for versatility in your forward core. And I think that those players would all play very, very well together. You can kind of mix and match, see what works, and it makes juggling your lines both between games and in games a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. Another name I just throw in there real quick is Zayne Parekh, just mainly because I would love to see a Caden Gooley, Zayne Parekh top pair. Oh my goodness. But yeah, let's move on to our second question here from Mac Nikolai on Twitter. How many stars are the Habs missing to become a yearly contender by position? I think defensively, probably one. Maybe even none. I think that Hudson, Gooley are really kind of a good core to build around. You can throw, the likes of David Reinbacher in there as well. I think defensively we're fine. The main other issue for me is offensively. There's basically a whole top line missing. I think that although Doc and Caulfield and Suzuki are kind of up there in terms of conversation, there's no bona fide superstar, and every single team that's won the cup in the last how many years has had at least one bona fide superstar. Like, you need that producer that can show up in those big moments, and I think the Habs don't have that yet. And obviously a goaltender would be really, really useful. Jacob Fowler's been looking really good, though. I can say that.
He is.
I'm not on the superstar page yet. I'm not even on the star page yet with Jacob Fowler, but he's been looking really good.
He has.
Yeah,
I think I'll add one more thing in there. I think that the Habs have the exact opposite problem of the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers have their superstar set. Montreal has basically their entire supporting cast is already there. It's either drafted or it's already in the NHL right now.
Yeah.
But what they really, really desperately need is that central, pivotal superstar, ideally at forward. And I think after that, everything kind of falls into place. You could see players like Caulfield and Slafkovsky easily slot into a top line if they are supporting pieces to a central superstar. And then you have like Doc, Suzuki, Newhook kind of just falling in behind that, and everything just kind of falls in really naturally. But as you said, it is the one superstar that's missing.
Yeah, I'll put it this way: if Christian Dvorak, when Christian Dvorak ends up being your fourth line center or third line left wing, you're there. Like, I think that's the moment where you're a bit more comfortable with where the Habs are offensively. But yeah, final question here. I think this is going to be a difficult one. Pseudofire asks on Twitter, where would you rank draft year Reinbacher and draft year Slafkovsky within the 2024 class? Slafkovsky for me would probably be in the kind of Caden Lindstrom, Konsta Helenius, maybe even Cole Eiserman conversation in terms of overall upside. I think that, 2022 was a bit of a rougher year in terms of overall high-end skill. Celebrini and Demidov for me are clear so far. I'd even maybe put Zayne Parekh and Sam Dickinson in that conversation. But once you hit that kind of 4 to 6, 4 to 7 range, I think I get a bit more comfortable with where your Slafkovsky would be. What do you think about that, though?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, we're still kind of seeing how everything shakes out. I think there are a couple players that could like leap over that on top of him. I think guys like Helenius and Lindstrom and maybe even guys like Zeev Buium could kind of like vault over where Slafkovsky would kind of fall. but this isn't as strong of a class as last year. Like last year, we were saying things like Slafkovsky would have been like in like the 10 to 15 range, maybe, if that was a bit pessimistic. But this year, I think that like seven-ish range is kind of where I feel like he would be falling, but we have been seeing Slafkovsky progress significantly now. But if we're looking purely in his draft year season, I think because he was still really only showing the high end upside in those like, really small sample size international tournaments, that he wouldn't quite have the same argument over players like Helenius, for instance, who's at nearly a point a game in Liiga, whereas Slafkovsky had like what, 5 points?
5 points in 20-ish games. But for me, Reinbacher would probably be in the Anton Salayev conversation. Like that's about the highest I could have him.
I have him lower, I think.
You'd have him lower than Salayev?
Yeah.
I'd understand that.
Again, I had Reinbacher ranked 16th last year, so that kind of just happens with how I'm looking at this draft class. I think he'd be ahead of guys like Adam Jiricek and Aaron Kiviharju. I think that he'd be above that tier of defensemen, but I think players like, slowly, I think Zeev Buium might be jumping over him.
Oh, for sure. For me right now,
Parekh,
for sure.
Dickinson, Salayev, and Buium are probably 4 defensemen I'd be having ranked over Reinbacher, and then kind of a bit of a toss-up with Levshunov.
Yeah, I think that's also where that conversation lies. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and update about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for the rest of the month of December as we continue our prospect coverage. Keep you updated on what's going on for the 2024 NHL draft for your team's prospects. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.